scalp has a total of 5 layers. Beginning at the most external layer and moving internally, we meet the skin, followed by the connective tissue layer, the aponeurosis of the scalp, a loose connective tissue layer, and finally the periosteum. And oh my goodness, would you look at that? The layers of the scalp conveniently spell scalp.
The scalp includes all the layers covering the skull on the top, back and sides, and has its boundaries at the border with the face at the front, above and behind the ears at the sides, and to the neck at the back and sides. Although we said that the scalp includes all the layers covering the skull, let's apply now, starting with the arteries. This is a diagram showing a head with the top layers, that is the skin and hypodermis, removed, and we're viewing it from the left-hand side. On each side, the scalp receives some of its blood supply from 3 arteries from the external carotid artery. These are the superficial temporal artery, which supplies most of the frontal and parietal regions of the scalp, the occipital artery, which supplies the posterior or occipital region, and the posterior auricular artery, which supplies the scalp posterior and superior to the ear. It also receives blood from 2 arteries from the internal carotid artery. These are the supraorbital artery, supplying the lateral forehead and frontal scalp, and the supratrochlear artery, supplying the middle section of the forehead and frontal scalp. So how about veins? Now we've layered on the veins shown in blue. We can see that from the scalp, blood drains via veins which follow the arteries. These veins are named the same as the arteries they trace. Those veins following arteries from the external carotid artery drain into the external jugular vein. These veins are namely the superficial temporal vein, the occipital vein, and the posterior auricular vein. The veins tracing the paths of the arteries from the internal carotid artery drain to the internal jugular vein. The veins in question here are the supraorbital vein and the supratrochlear vein. So that's how blood leaves the scalp, but what about the interstitial fluid? A small amount will drain back into the veins, but most will be directed into lymphatic channels. This is a diagram to illustrate the main lymphatic drainage routes from the head. Lymph from the posterior half of the scalp drains to the occipital lymph nodes, which are on the back of the head somewhere around here, and the posterior auricular lymph nodes, which sit just behind the ear. The anterior half of the scalp drains to the parotid nodes, which are these nodes here. Downstream from these nodes, the lymphatic drainage channels begin to interconnect and eventually drain to the submandibular and deep cervical lymph nodes. So we've cleared the lymph out, now what about sensation? This is the same diagram we used to show the arteries and veins, except this time we've layered on the major nerves. Innervation from the scalp posteriorly up to the vertex or tip of the head derives from the C2 spinal root. This nerve supply is via the greater occipital nerves, situated a couple of centimetres on either side of the midline, and the lesser occipital nerves, which are further around the skull towards the pinnae of the ears. Anteriorly, the scalp's nerve supply comes from branches of the trigeminal nerve. The ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve gives off the supraorbital and supratrochlear nerves. The maxillary branch sends out the zygomaticotemporal nerve, which supplies the hairless part of the temple, and the mandibular branch provides the auriculotemporal nerve.